Hello and welcome to episode number 41 of the Know Your Physio podcast. I'm your host, Andrés Preschel, helping you discover your science to optimize your life, health, and performance. And today's guest is Brian Sanders, aka Mr. Food Lies. He goes by Food Lies on social media, and he's actually the filmmaker behind Food Lies, the film. He's the host of the Peak Human podcast, founder of SAPIEN.org, and today's show is all about thriving on nose to tail. The nose to tail diet, for those who are not familiar, is a carnivore diet. And we talk about ancestral wisdom to combat modern life. One of the major themes of today's episode is how to approach nutrition in such a way that truly allows you to honor not just our ancestral ways, right? So it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, looking back to our ancestry, but how to honor the rest of the planet by sourcing food correctly, by sourcing food in such a way that supports the environment. And by environment, I mean our internal environment as much as the external environment, aka the rest of the world. Because a lot of what we eat nowadays, and this is the essence of Food Lies, right, of Brian Sanders and everything he's all about, is that today we tend to eat foods that are processed, that are not sourced correctly, that ruin us from the inside out, and in the process they ruin the rest of the planet. And why does this happen? Well, because we've been lied to by the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, by the terrible standards for nutrition, knowledge, and information in the medical field, and the non-existent emphasis on disease prevention, and I can go on. But anyway, how do we take an approach that actually resonates with our ancestry, honors our ancestry, honors ourselves and the rest of the planet? Well, hey, we made a podcast all about it. You're about to dive in. So we hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Know Your Physio podcast. I'm here with Brian Sanders, host of the Peak Human podcast, filmmaker of Food Lies, CEO and head of content at sapiens.org, a health technology and media company with principles based on human evolution, ancestral traditions, and modern science. He graduated from UCLA with a degree in mechanical engineering, works as a health coach at Evolve Healthcare, and also works to spread the awareness of regenerative agriculture and increase access to well-raised animal products through his company, Nose to Tail, delivering premium grass-finished meat raised in Texas directly to your door. It's a pleasure to have you, Brian. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Andrés. Yeah, good to be here.
Awesome. So, Brian, I'd like to start with why. Tell us why you do what you do and what brought you here to the Sapiens Project, to Peak Human. Why do you do what you do, man?
Yeah, it's a personal journey, really. It starts with two sides, my parents and myself. So I guess I'll do the sad part first. Yeah, I lost both my parents at 30. It's crazy. It's young. I guess they're a little bit older than normal parents, but they went too early. They had these chronic diseases that we think are normal these days, right? And everyone's just like, oh yeah, like I'm on like 8 medications and I'm overweight and this is just how life is. And I don't think that's the case. So that woke me up to that, right? It started me down the journey. It also started because I was 30 when this happened. And that's kind of when you can't eat whatever you want anymore. People start to kind of slow down. I don't think your metabolism slows down. I think you're less adapted to the crazy modern diet and lifestyle we live. And I did a great episode with Dr. Michael Rose. He's really interesting take on this where he figured out it isn't that your metabolism slows down. It's that as you get older, you're less adapted to eating garbage food and sitting around all day. So that's just an interesting tidbit there. So yeah, I started changing my diet, got into like Mark Sisson, Primal Blueprint, just getting into this whole kind of ancestral health scene. And so many changes. I was always active, but all my problems with my like little things with my body went away. My body composition changed. I didn't have allergies anymore all of a sudden. I didn't have knee pain, joint pain. I didn't have overuse injury pain from using the computer that I suffered with for so long. I didn't have acid reflux anymore. Just all these things. I mean, I lost, like 15 pounds of just like fat around my stomach and like neck. And Oh man, it was crazy. So I just wanted to let the world know, you know, I just 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, I started making my film Food Lies and just dedicated all my time to this. I was in tech, I was in mechanical engineering before, and I just went all in on this Food Lies project to make the film to let people know what the deal was, well, how easy it is to make changes in your health and take control of your health by just changing a few things you eat. Like, I didn't, I never counted calories before. I never counted macros before. I didn't do any of that stuff before, and I didn't do any of that after. Yet my whole life changed, right? Just because I chose different foods. And so I wanted to let people know that it's possible, it's enjoyable, it's easy. We should all be doing this.
Hey, so the passing of your parents is what drove you to this field and what inspired you to really dig deep on the science. And let me ask you something. If you had the chance to get that kind of experience, rather learning earlier on in your life, how do you think you would have approached your parents? And I ask you this because I'm sure a lot of people tuning in, maybe their parents aren't as healthy as they like them to be. What do you think those people can do? How do you think they can approach their parents?
Mm.
Um, about this kind of with this kind of information and to change their lives. I'll just mention from a personal level, as much as I know, as passionate I am about this field, as much as I've learned, my parents are the most difficult people for me to approach because my parents are the most comfortable in telling me to just shut up and let them carry on with the lives they live and the choices they make. So what recommendation do you have for those people?
Yeah, that's the hardest part. The people closest to you are the hardest to change. They're the hardest. It's the hardest people that will listen to you. They don't. That's a problem. That's also your parents. They're like, I know more than you. Or even if it's just your sibling, they're just like, oh, I'm not going to listen to this guy. Like, he's just like my brother. Like, so that's the hardest part. We'll give a tip. What's worked for me, speaking of siblings, my sister, she changed. She wasn't really listening to me. And what happened, it was someone else. You need a third party to kind of get them in on it. So what happened is her friend started somehow listening to my content and following me on Instagram. And then it got back to her. So now my sister's like, oh, I guess my brother isn't just some wacko idiot. It's like this girl, her friend has endorsed me. Right. So I think there's a secret way. If you can get someone else to kind of plant the seed, then you'll have a much better chance, because if you just go one on one, it never really works with your family. Okay. And then what I would have done differently is, well, it would have been hard, but I think I would have tried to let them know what they were doing was not good and that their doctors were not on top of their health. This is what I found talking to many doctors. I work with Dr. Gary at Evolve Healthcare. We don't have the good ways to even find out if you're metabolically damaged. So I was looking up some statistics for the film. 9 out of 10 people who have prediabetes do not know it. This is from the CDC, right? Big organization. They even admit that 9 out of 10 people who have prediabetes don't even know it. That's a huge problem. And I think our definition of prediabetes is even too relaxed. Like there's so many people with these problems, right? Diabetes type 2 is an insulin problem. And people don't even know they're having these problems. And I think that insulin problems are the root of so many diseases, so much of heart disease and Alzheimer's, and of course, type 2 diabetes, which leads to all kinds of other diseases, is from insulin problems with your blood sugar. And we don't know it because we only just, maybe we'll test your blood sugar and it seems okay, but we don't know how high your insulin is that is making it seem okay because the insulin's doing its job. So it's kind of expensive to do insulin tests. So I don't want to get too technical here, but we don't have good ways to even find out if you are pre-diabetic. And then even those things might be too low. The standards are so low. So that's what happened with my parents. No one told them they had insulin problems. No one told them anything was wrong. They were just going about their life and they kind of look like everyone else. Oh, you have a dad bod. They had like just carrying excess fat. And so they weren't obese. They didn't have overt medical problems, but they did. Right. So that's the problem, is they didn't know they had it. The doctors weren't recognizing it. That's not how our healthcare system is set up, for doctors to say, hey, wait a second, like what's that that belly? That's not good. Even though it's normal and everyone has one, at your age doesn't mean that it's okay. So that's where I'm at. I would try to let them know that carrying excess fat, having all these little things, they add up to a lot. And you need to just start recognizing them, change the diet. And well, then you have to go into the whole discussion of what they thought a healthy diet was, right? They were going by the food pyramid, and I grew up going by the food pyramid even into my 30s. I still was following the food pyramid at 30 when this all happened. I was like, yeah, I'm eating everything. I'm doing like low fat this and eating the pasta with like the vegetables and like lean chicken, and doing the whole thing that everyone's telling me to do. Yet I'm becoming, like my dad and having the dad bod already.
Yeah, it's a matter of, yes, providing the information, but it's also having a third party, so to speak, like having some element of showing rather than telling through someone in your personal network, like a mutual friend or a sibling, or a friend of a sibling, that can show the influence that your information is having. Because just giving your parents information, they'll just be like, hey, you're what, a teenager, or you're too young, like, we know better than you, or just shut up because I'm your parent, whatever. But if you can actually show that somehow through a third source, third party, some other way, it is definitely more motivating. So can you tell us a little more about Food Lies? And tell us how you came up with the name. What is it about food, and how is food lying to us, and what's all that about?
Yeah. Well, I was trying to keep it as concise as possible, just two words there. But it does say a lot, right? I think most of what the mainstream has told people is a lie. Like it's almost opposite. That's the crazy part is once I started looking into it, it's like, wow, how are they wrong about almost everything? They're just kind of like, oh, salt is going to kill you. Like, no, salt is fine. Like all the studies we have for salt being bad, it's like in middle-aged men who are already sick. It's like hypertensive men who had heart attacks and, you know, maybe more salt isn't good for them. Or it's because all the processed foods are stuffed with salt, and or they're just wrapping it up with all these other problems people have, so they just think it's salt. So that's a good example. Salt is not bad for you. Salt is essential, right? This is a
Well,
good
I know
electrolyte.
you're a big fan of Dr. James Dinigal Antonio. We had him on the podcast way back, and he kind of describes how or not enough salt actually increases cravings for sugar, and how sugar is the real white crystal that works against you,
That you
and
should be
promotes
worried
the
about.
detriment
Yeah.
of disease.
Yep. He wrote the salt fix. Exactly. You could read hundreds of pages about why salt's not the enemy. Then they're talking about saturated fat being bad. Guess what? I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we've ever made. That pushing polyunsaturated fats like the seed oils, the alternative to saturated fat, could have been the biggest nightmare in public health in the past 100 years, or in all of history. This we'll see, but a lot of this new science coming out, all this signs are pointing to switching over to these refined seed oils that are high in omega-6, high in linoleic acid, that are easily oxidized, are one of the hugest problems ever with people's health. And I've seen that across the world. We can talk about Africa later. So all these things, red meat being bad, I think that's complete lie. Uh, having to eat 7 to 11 servings of whole grains, I think that's a big fat lie. All these things, all the standard government advice is basically based on either food industry propaganda studies, funding, or other other sources where it's not your best health interest in mind. And a lot of times just big health organizations, just they don't have your best interest, or it's impossible to have individuals best interest when you're trying to make these sweeping policies. So food lies, yes, at the high level, it's about re-examining all of these mainstream ideas about nutrition that have been propagated for 50 years, and why they're wrong.
And returning to what you were saying about insulin, and most of these pre-diabetic cases going undiagnosed, it just makes sense with this food pyramid. There's just, people are over consuming carbohydrate, they're over consuming these seed oils, over consuming all this crap, really setting up an environment of inflammation where a number of diseases will thrive. And then And take something like, for example, take something like continuous glucose monitoring and how useful of a tool that is for anyone, whether you're healthy or not. Doctors have to prescribe that once you have the diagnosis being diabetic, right? I know that now it's a lot more accessible finally, but it's unfortunate that they make this recommendation based off poor data, and then on top of that, they don't give you the testing so that you can determine what steps to take or to see the impact that food has on your personal health and wellness. They only do that if you've been diagnosed, which is not the case for most people. So let me just ask you something, and I don't want to get too controversial here, but why is there this huge mismatch, and why are people now afraid to return to their ancestral ways? And how can returning to these ancestral
Hmm.
ways and returning to some of this ancestral
Yeah.
diet and habit, how can it actually support our health and well-being?
So I don't know if it's getting conspiratorial because all that I've looked into, it's pretty obvious what happened. I mean, some people, if you know zero about this and you just follow whatever you see on the TV, then maybe you'll think it's conspiratorial. But if you spent, a day or two looking into how these organizations started and how they make the recommendations and who funds it, it's not. It's just about money. A lot of it, yeah, it's just about money. It's simple, and we go through it all in the film. I don't want to do the whole spiel, the whole Ansel Keys thing. Some people have heard about this and why we think saturated fat's bad in the first place. And he just, made these correlations with different countries and came to a conclusion. And so it kind of started there. And then what happened is people jumped on board like big lobbying groups, right? It started even before big food industry was even that big. We found researching for the film that the original like kind of dietary guidelines did have more meat and dairy, and they had less refined grains and or just grains in general. And then it came out. Then the big lobbying industries of grain and all these different millions and billions of dollars even back then. I don't know the figures. They came in and they're like, well, I don't think I think we need more of the grains. We need more, less of the meat. It got political. Um, there was part of the story was even food stamps and like food stamp programs. Like, how are we going to feed the people? That even factored in. It's people were like, well, you realize if we make this food pyramid saying that we need fresh meat and dairy and these are good for people, that it's going to cost a lot, and how are we have all these programs. The dietary guidelines dictate what goes to hospitals, nursing homes, military, public schools, all this stuff, food stamps program. So if they say, yeah, we need fresh produce, fresh meat, fresh eggs, fresh dairy. How much is that going to cost? So they're like, oh, okay, we got all these cheap grains and yeah, we can subsidize them even further. Let's just make that the bulk of the calories. And then we'll say cut down on meat. So I mean, it just started with that. And this was like 50 years ago. Right. And then that kind of gave the green light to the food industry, which just became bigger and bigger. So they're like, okay, well, fat's bad. Meats, mainly just, yeah, fat's bad. So let's take the fat out of products and we'll put back in sugars and more refined grains to make it taste okay. You need to just put a bunch of sugar in it so it tastes okay. It's like, oh, it's fine. It's low fat, even though it's high sugar. It's like Snackwell's cookies. It's so funny. It's like, oh, we got these bogus cookies that have like 30 ingredients and we just stuff sugar in them, but they're low fat. So it's all good. So yeah, it kind of just snowballed from there. Right. And then, so now there's more and more money in this processed food industry, and there's such a high profit margin on that. And I can tell you, as a my nose to tail company, we sell just meat that's well raised. We don't make a lot of money. It's a very, very hard business because most of the money goes to raising the animals and paying the rancher and paying the processor, right? If I wanted to make money, I just make some bogus cereal, whatever, process this, process that, could make tons of money. So I get it now. I get it. Once these big food companies get all the money, then they can start doing the funding of other studies to show it's like, oh, look at this. It's okay. It's good for you. They have Coca-Cola and Gatorade, funding things. Oh, it's just about calories. It's just about moving more. You're just lazy. That's why you're fat. You should drink Coke and Gatorade, and then you just have to exercise more, and then you'll burn off these calories, right? It's like it all stems from the money, and then it comes the studies, and then the lobbying. right? Then they just keep the dietary guidelines how they are with their millions and billions of dollars of funding to lobby, to do marketing campaigns, to fund studies. So that's kind of the high level view of why everything we know about nutrition is pretty wrong from the mainstream view.
Right. And to be fair, I think most of my audience is familiar with some of this information. I think how I'd like to empower them, maybe you can help me, is in helping them have the conversations that will enable this sort of domino effect and get everybody on board with what's right and what's wrong. And that being said, what kind of conversation do you think we can have around saturated fat? How can the average person communicate to their friend or family member that, in fact, the dietary guidelines are wrong, that they need to be reestablished, that there's conflicts of interest that need to be looked at? What can we say? Is there like a blurb, something that we can say that just makes the point and helps someone go, hey, you know what? Maybe you're right, and
Mhm.
inspire them to,
Well,
to, to, to look further.
well, yeah, I think I did that whole spiel because I think that is necessary. And you need to tell people why they need to know. They like, oh, I get it. There is this whole thing. It's not that it's not a conspiracy, or it's not just like, why would all doctors be wrong, right? Why am I, as a mechanical engineer, smarter than all your doctors? That's what a lot of parents would say, right? And you have to start with the discussion of where this stuff started and the money and the interests that started it. And then you have to, right? So you have to say, oh, well, where did the textbooks come from that your doctors learned from? Well, it's all connected, right? This was all part of this 50-year kind of mistake and just bad science, and they made it way into the textbooks, and that's what everyone was trained. That's why your doctor doesn't know yet, because there's this big industry of sick care that's just being perpetuated. So yes, you have to go through why, and then you could say, well, there's some new science. So more direct to your question. Well, actually, there's some new science about saturated fat, and that might get a little technical too, but I always recommend Nina Teichel's book, The Big Fat Surprise. She spent almost 10 years researching it to really show all the studies that say, oh, we were wrong. Here's this buried study. Oh, this was in someone's basement for 18 years. And and it showed that saturated fat was okay, and that polyunsaturated fat, the seed oils, were actually worse. Like, well, why didn't we hear about this? And they said, well, we were so disappointed with the results. The scientists, she actually contacted them, found them. I don't know if it's her or someone else, and she just reported on it in her book. But the scientist was quoted saying, we were disappointed with the results, right? It was against what they thought, so they decided to not publish it. And this is the stuff that happens. So you got to let people know, yes, that's why you don't know that saturated fat's okay. So then the simplest argument I like to go to is just, you don't have to look at a study, you can just think logically. For all of history, we were eating saturated fats. We did not have seed oils. We did not have these high omega-6, high linoleic acid oils. It was impossible. Yes, we could have eaten some seeds when they were in season, but we would never have gotten this amount of the polyunsaturated fats that we can get now through this highly industrialized process of 16 steps and using hexane solvents and all this crazy stuff to make seed oils. That happened when really just in the 1910s, right? Crisco was invented around 1916, something like that. And they didn't really become a large part of our calories until really like 1980, really, when it really skyrocketed, when the dietary guidelines started pushing them. So we didn't have these seed oils, this other type of fat, polyunsaturated fat, linoleic acid, for 99.99% of history. Like, we're talking 50 years at the most that it was in our diet in a meaningful way. And you're telling me that these saturated fats that we've been eating for all of history are bad for us? It's crazy. So you could start there, I think.
Yeah, and something I want to mention, and most people uh, who know me know this about me already, but I'm not sure if you're familiar. My parents are physicians, and so they're in this field. This is what they practice, and it's been hard making this introduction because doctors think that they're so well versed in the overwhelming amount of science out there, and that any guideline that's established by science is in fact true. I know there has to be a certain level of skepticism always, but it's been hard nonetheless to make this introduction. What really is health? What really is nutrition? How do we really prevent disease? Why are the guidelines wrong? Um, I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. Everything that you just shared is something that I want to
Mm.
emphasize, and to emphasize further. Can you kind of help us understand what kinds of foods really have these oils? It's hidden in so many foods. How can
Mhm.
we put this into perspective? Something I want to share, by the way, is if you go to some place like Whole Foods, for example. I don't know if you've been to the Hot Bar in Whole Foods. You'd think Whole Foods, oh my God, it's such healthy food. Whole Foods, it's so healthy. You go to the Hot Bar, everything has canola oil. Everything. Everything has canola oil in it. So how can we make sure that the foods that we're eating, in fact, don't
Mm.
have these oils? How can we actually make decisions that we feel good about through and through, since it's hidden in so many of our foods?
It's a good question, and it's funny because I live above a Whole Foods now. It's right below me here in Austin, and I never I hate going to Whole Foods. 90% of it's garbage. I don't eat 90% of what's in their store because it's all stuff with seed oils. That's the whole thing. Anything in a box or package, very good chance it has seed oils. Very good chance. I was just looking at that. There was like this chip that was made out of pork. I was like, oh, this is cool. It's like they compressed pork into a chip, of course, cooked in seed oil. So even this thing, I'm like, oh, this has got to be some sort of paleo product. They're gonna know what's up. Seed oil, cooked in seed oil. So it's gonna be in everything that's in a package, basically, and it's even in the hot bar. Oh my god, all the prepared foods are gonna have it too. Partly because it's super cheap, partly because this is what people thought was healthy. And so, what you're really gonna have to do to avoid it is start cooking for yourself. I don't know if that's a tall order for some people, but that's just the truth of it. If you want to be healthy, you can save money too. If you want to just like really take control, and I don't think you need to do this from day one because I didn't do it day one. You need to cook for yourself. You don't have to be a chef. You just need to learn how to heat up food, right? And it is a journey sometimes, right? Like I mean, 8 years ago, I wasn't I wasn't all into it, I was still like, "Man, I wanna go out and do this." As of now, I it other like, going out to eat isn't very appealing to me, or, like, like, trying to get any kind of prepared food, or, get some quick food. That's just not appealing to me. Of course, I would like to go out with friends and, socialize, but there's still ways around, you can order. So I guess that's partly to answer the question, is there's ways to order at restaurants and just avoid any fried foods because there's basically 99.9% chance it's fried in oil. So avoid fried food, and yeah, I mean, you could get by if you're just, ordering a piece of meat. You can ask them to cook it in butter. You can get some, whatever vegetables in butter. Uh, but yeah, you have to just start cooking for yourself. I, I I'm guessing you kind of agree with that. It's like it's kind of hard
Yeah,
to avoid. You just have to avoid all the packaged processing. Yeah.
yeah, I cook like I'd say maybe 90% of my food, and it's unbelievable how simple it is. You on Instagram, the food content that gets the most engagement is obviously the fanciest looking, most appetizing, whatever. But the truth of the matter is, you can get by and thrive on the simplest combinations that take minutes to make. And I'll tell you what, I eat super, 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 super healthy food, the highest quality meat, fish, etc. But I would say that every plate of food that I consume is maybe between $5 and $8. And if you go out, not only you're paying for the food, but you're paying in time to get there, to wait around. There's tips, there's tax, it ends up being so much more expensive. And then of course the inevitable uh, 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 consequence is that these foods are an investment in your health, and you're going to have to invest in the detriments that occur later on. You're going to have to invest in healthcare if you invest in your health. So, can you tell us a little more about the process of eating food with other people and cooking it, and how that actually is related to peak human performance, how it brings us back to these ancestral ways? Because as we know, food isn't simply about macro and micronutrients. There's so much surrounding food that contributes to total health and wellness. And I know that you had an experience in Africa with the Hadza tribe. What did you learn over there about what it means to eat and enjoy these foods together, about hunting, about preparing meals together, about experiencing that with people, and how it ties into personal health and wellness?
Yeah. There's a entirely different view of food in the rest of the world, and I think throughout history. Now, food is either I want something yummy to like mouth pleasure type stuff, is like, man, how can I get the like most delicious thing to stuff in my face, or how can I get calories, and that's about it, right? And then yes, it's social. People understand that it's a social occasion too, but again, it's more based around how can we make the most delicious concoction that doesn't really contribute to health. And from what I've seen around the world, Africa, I mean, I've traveled to a lot of different places studying kind of more traditional cultures, and it's a completely different ball game with basically any other country that's not super westernized like the UK or say Australia. I went to Costa Rica, I've been to Japan, I've been to Brazil, I've been to Peru, Africa. It's all about nutrition, companionship, sharing, you know, just it's a completely different thing. And you can still do it. There's some people that still do this in modern society, and it's great when you find your tribe. Like I've done in Austin, it can be that we get together and we make food, and everyone brings well-sourced ingredients and we cook them together, and it's a completely different experience. So I don't know. I'm not trying to get like woo-woo or anything about it. I'm saying it's a very simple switch of mindset that you can do and still enjoy in modern society. And so I'll talk about Africa specifically. I mean, this is the extreme example, the Hadza, right? So we went out and hunted for like 8 hours with these guys, right? So their whole life revolves around just acquiring food. And that food is animal food. They're not out there looking for shrubs and like whatever. Yeah, they got some honey. We stopped and cut down this portion of well, they didn't cut down the tree. They just chopped open this portion of the hive, and we got some honey, and then we kept going. But yes, they are after the animal foods. So that's their whole daily activity, and then they come home and then they eat it and they share it. And I mean, that's just their life, right? So that's what I'm saying. That's the extreme example. And what we did, sliced open the animal. They took the guts out. I couldn't tell if they were trying to give it to the dogs or the dogs just got it. But they have a whole pack of hunting dogs that help them, and so they got most of the guts. Then they immediately went for the liver, and these guys with the dirtiest hands in the world, and they started cutting the liver with the dirtiest knife, covered in guts too, that had all like the entrails on it. Cut some liver, and I just ate it. It had all kinds of slime on it, but hey, I felt great. This is what we did. I think if you want to talk about like microbiome and like all this cleanliness stuff, and oh man, I haven't washed my hands. I washed my hands less in the last 2 years. Everyone's like washing their hands more, using more Purell. Like that is not for me. I'm the exact opposite. I'm trying to get dirty. I'm trying to expose myself to different, you know, quote, like, like germs. It's like, oh man, these germs. No, these are helping your microbiome. This is helping you be resilient. This is helping all this stuff. So yes, I ate the fresh raw liver from this animal. Is a tik, like a little kind of deer, a small deer. So they share the liver, and then they, yeah, basically take apart the animal, put it on sticks, and roast it by the fire and eat the entire thing. And we even ate the head. So they took the head. This kid. So there's one probably maybe 14-year-old, 13-year-old was like part of the men's group. And so he took the head. He was not. They cooked it. Then he was like gnawing on all the meat on the head, and then we cracked it open, and then we ate the brains. And yeah, it was very mild tasting. It was kind of interesting. Uh, so yes, there's the most extreme example of sharing a meal and food. And what it was about was just using the whole animal, nutrition, hunting together, telling stories about it. Where we're going to go tomorrow. Everything about it was about acquiring nutrition for their group.
Check this out. This is, I don't know if you can see this picture. Let me see if it, do you see that?
Yep.
So that was me yesterday. I was doing
Nice.
some free dive spearfishing, and between dives, we took out a little plug on a rod, and we landed this African pompano. And this is a super prized fish over here in Miami. You can't buy it in any store. They're really hard to come by, but it's a very sustainable fishery. You have to be like 3 miles offshore. You can only harvest one per person per boat. They have to be a certain size, beyond like the mating size. So it's very, very sustainable, very protected. And whenever we get one, I mean, it's just Oh my God, it's a huge, like, we celebrate unlike anything else. So I live in Miami Beach. You look around, there's all these buildings everywhere. It's your average big city, right? And when we're on the boat catching these fish, you're in their environment, you're hunting with your friends, you're having a great time, you're enjoying nature, you're in that moment. And you take this picture and you look off into the distance, and the city's right there, it's right behind you. And it reminds you how we actually can practice a lot of these ancestral ways that support optimal health, optimal performance, fitness, nutrition, no matter where you live. I know that for me, it may be a little more accessible than other people, but for the people that live, that are landlocked, there's rivers. You can go fly fishing, you can catch some trout, make a fire, enjoy that with your friends. And there's so much tied to that that is rewarding. Being with people, the endorphins, the oxytocin, the joy of telling the story, how you got that fish or how you made that fire. There's so many elements to it that really make for an incredible quality of life. And I'll tell you something. You mentioned on the beginning of this podcast, you mentioned tracking macros. I don't know if you track macros today. Do you currently track your macros? No, right?
I don't
I
do
think that was the
anything.
point that you were
I don't
making.
even have a scale.
Yeah.
I
So
don't do
so
it.
and I know that there's a lot of big figures on social media that are, have their PhD. I'm not going to say any names, but have a PhD in nutrition, PhD in,
Mhm.
physiology, and they love to support this idea of tracking macros. I'll tell you why I believe that tracking macros is a complete waste of time, and why I'm not a fan. And I'd love to get your take on this. I think tracking macros is extremely selfish. I think it's an extremely selfish way to support fitness and optimal health, because it's all about what works for you with your fitness regimen to lose or gain or maintain your weight. And it doesn't consider the aspect of eating with people that you love or care about, or eating in a community. It's about how can you meal prep and fit your macros, and if it fits your macros and it's fitting your goals, and all that we care about is your body composition, because that's all that matters. And we see all these people that then, as a result of tracking their macros, meal prepping, they're shredded to the bone, and people think, oh my God, this is the kind of health and fitness figure that I want to see and that I want to be influenced by, someone that has this body, and that's all I care about. And sort of, it sets the paradigm, it shifts the paradigm in a way that really doesn't support optimal health. It supports a look that only really lasts if you're meeting your macronutrient requirements. And then beyond that, I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's sustainable to track everything. I think it leads you to madness. And I think it can be the onset of, rather, it can promote the onset of a lot of poor relationships with food and eating disorders. There's so much we can, I maybe we can go down this rabbit hole for just a moment, but I'd love to get your take on calorie tracking and why it just doesn't make sense to support optimal health, and why it doesn't make sense from an evolutionary perspective either.
Yeah, it's one of the main things I'm against. That's like out of all the things I hate the most, it's the calorie bros or macro bros saying that this is all that matters. There's a lot to it, and I just think that. Okay, here's an example. If you go down that rabbit hole, next thing you know, you're fitting Pop Tarts in your diet, right? That's the joke, the
Yeah.
Pop Tarts. So it's like, yeah, that's why I'm so against it, right? And it's everything you said. It's not sustainable. You're gonna have this bad relationship. There's all kinds of stuff going on. But if you go down that rabbit hole, then you end up fitting these things in your diet. And I think that that's the opposite of what you should do, right? What you should do is how do I fit the most nutrients in my diet? They're like, how can I fit in the most junk food? And I've talked to these guys, I've done interviews with some of them. I've met some of them in person, and that's their goal. What can the most I can get away with, and what can I do for a temporary period to look good for a photo shoot or for a show, and then go back to being kind of overweight. This is the opposite of long-term health, right? This is all about short-term, which is all about what our society is obsessed with, is short-term gratification, right? The long term is what everyone needs to be thinking about. And delayed gratification, I think, is one of the most important things of all time. People should know about that, right? That is how people are successful. What I've seen, delayed gratification, right? You're not going to get it right away. And so, man, if you're after calories and macros, you're going to end up not focusing on nutrition. So I said like, how do we get the most nutrients in your diet for the least amount of calories? I mean, I don't think you should track them. Maybe you can to know about calories, or maybe in the beginning you can look at it if you want, and if it helps you, sure. But the whole point is getting the most amount of nutrients without eating too much. We'll just call it, quote, too much, right? If you start gaining fat on your belly, that means you're eating too much, right? For whatever reason, your energy expenditure is off in some way. Maybe because of foods you're eating, right? Maybe you're eating the wrong foods. If you're eating like a whole bunch of refined foods, and you could still be exercising and still be gaining weight because these foods aren't benefiting you and they're causing some metabolic dysfunction. So, how to get the most nutrients per calorie? Well, that's about eating whole foods and animal foods, right? If you're eating if you're getting enough protein, also, it's not like I'm saying macros don't matter, but it's like you just don't need to track them, right? I don't count protein, but I just always know, man, I'm eating protein at every meal. Like I'm getting fish or eggs or meat or all three in every meal. And if you're doing that, then you will be getting your nutrients. You will be hitting your protein requirements probably without counting them. And then, so what's the opposite of that is the least nutrients per calorie are processed foods, right? The more processed the food is, the more basically empty calories are in them. This is a really simplistic way of looking at it, but man, if you're just eating a whole bunch of refined grains and sugar and oils, like these things have no nutritional value and they're just adding extra calories. So even if you just want to think of it with purely calorie standpoint, well, you're screwed. You're screwed by eating those foods because they're just stuffing in a bunch of extra calories that your body doesn't want, right? They're the worst kind of calories, and it's just stuffing it in and displacing protein and nutrients. Like really the goal is to get protein and nutrients. How do you get that? Whole foods. It's simple. You get all your protein and nutrients from whole foods. Animal foods. Animal foods have the most bioavailable and nutrient dense and complete protein and nutrients you can get. So, yeah, I mean that's kind of the high level view of it.
I recently had, and I'm sure you're familiar with Alan Aragon. Alan
Mm-hmm.
Aragon, so he's an expert in protein, and he does, he makes these amazing research reviews, all things nutrition. He's actually one of the OGs of the If It Fits Your Macros movement, the IIFYM movement. And he was, we actually had a discussion on the show about how this sort of took the wrong turn, right? Because people were now starting to get Pop Tarts in there, and whatever, as long as it fits, it was okay. And he sort of spoke on behalf of how it really should be about fitting, trying to fit nutrient dense foods. But even then, I think that that's a movement that is just not. It doesn't parallel optimal health. It doesn't parallel nutrient density. It doesn't parallel the real foods that can promote peak human performance and decision making and quality of life. So, that being said, what can we say about an excess of nutrient density? Have you had a chance to look at anything as far as, can you consume an excess of some of these macronutrients? Like, I'll give you an example. My mother, who is now making dietary changes because she's a huge fan of the podcast and she loves some of the guests that I have on. In fact, this podcast has inspired her a lot and helped her a lot. She asked me the question of, hey, I'm sure liver is very nutrient dense, but isn't there such thing as too many micronutrients? Is there anything as far as going over the top? What are some of your thoughts there?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, there's been a little bit of debate about this because I'm like deep in the meat world and the nutrient dense world and nose to tail world. So I don't know if anyone else is part of this debate, but I've heard some of it. Is that yes, that you can get too much vitamin A from liver and it could be a problem. So I think part of it is there's maybe one study out there or account, and it's from polar bear liver, and it's insanely high in vitamin A, and it's just
Polar
no one
bear
should be eating.
liver.
Yes. So the only actual toxicity from liver has been documented was from polar bear liver.
Who the
And yeah,
heck was
these
eating
guys,
polar bear liver?
I think it was some explorers, in the Arctic, and they, they ate a whole polar bear liver, and man, like you should not be eating an entire polar bear liver. I'll just tell you that. And so they had some problems. So that's not the normal case. I think I've never heard of a problem with it. I think people naturally can regulate their consumption of liver. It's not something that people just gorge on every day. There is probably some kind of thing out there with having too much vitamin A if you're eating, just ounces and ounces of liver every single day. And I've heard a little bit about someone's like, oh, maybe this isn't good, or this could cause these other problems, or maybe if you're already metabolically damaged. But generally, this is probably one of the least concerns I've ever heard of. Like if you had a hierarchy of concerns, this might be at the bottom, because it's like, who in this world is eating too much liver? I think most people are deficient in all the things that come in liver, which would be, yes, vitamin A, fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K, B12, and copper. Copper is a great thing that people need more of, and is very well packed in liver. So
Right. So
not worried.
the important questions are really on the opposite end of that spectrum. Like, what are you missing out on if you don't include these foods in your diet regularly? And what may the case for the incidence of disease be if you don't get these nutrients, or if you're consuming foods that are lacking nutrients? So that's really the important question, and something that I would ask in response to, hey, isn't there such thing as too many micronutrients? It's likely that you're probably deficient. So
99, yeah, I would venture an estimate that 99.9% of people in the world are undernourished with micronutrients. And there could be some hunter gatherer out there eating liver that, you know what I mean? So, yes, I think what you bring up is a great topic that it's hard to find answers for, right? I think that's part of the problem. These guys that are in the if it fits your macros camp and the calorie camp, and just even modern medical people, it's so hard to show to prove that these if you're having a lack of these micronutrients, that it's going to become a problem, right? It's like it takes 20 years maybe to develop, or maybe it would be a shorter time and you don't even know it. You don't know that these mineral deficiencies are causing the problem, or that the certain vitamin or mineral deficiency is causing someone to overeat. Like you kind of mentioned that about salt with Dr. James. I've heard about this. Like people, your body is trying to get nutrients out of food. Okay, here's a little detour. Part of the problem with modern food and all the hyper palatable processed food with all the fake flavorings is it tricks your body into thinking it's getting nutrients because it tastes like it is. For all of history, we've tasted food and known that it had certain nutrients. Now that's been hijacked. So now our body's tricked. We're getting nutrient less food, nutrient free foods like Doritos. So this is from Mark Schatzker, Dorito Effect, great book. This is kind of his thesis that I'm summarizing right now, is that you're getting the empty nothingness from Doritos, but it tastes like you're getting a bunch of stuff, tricks your body, you're screwed. So I think it's super hard. Oh, well, I was going on down this tangent that people who may have nutrient deficiencies, so they may be eating more of something to try to get nutrients, or they may be trying to snack on like sugary things or certain things that aren't good for them because they're trying to get nutrients because they're deficient in something. And that once they get a nutrient complete diet, they stop craving all these things because their body gets it. And so that's why they were overweight or having problems, is really stemming from a nutrient deficiency. There's so much to this stuff that's like not well proven, or you have to you can study each little thing, or like, oh, why did this happen in this person, or what disease manifested from this nutrient deficiency. So it's just hard to really tell people and let them know that how important it is. And then again, like I said, 20 years, it could be 20 years of some deficiency, or you're just not, or just low micronutrients in general. Then all of a sudden you have all these different problems. And how do we prove that? Right. And so it's hard, right? I could go back to Weston Price, and he went around the world and studied all the different ancient cultures and their food. And that's a whole nother story. But one part of it is that he brought home foods that they were eating and they tested them in a lab. And he found 10 to 20 times the fat soluble vitamins than in modern food. This was in Ohio. He was a dentist from Ohio in the early 1900s. So, I mean, there's part of it. So these people he studied had amazing health. They didn't have cavities. That's part of why he went on his journey to see their tooth health. They were all free of disease. They didn't have chronic disease. Like, I mean, they died of different things. It was not, nutrition related chronic disease. They didn't have heart attacks. They didn't have Alzheimer's. They didn't have all these things. They were eating animal foods, whole foods that had way more vitamins and minerals. And I mean, that's kind of some of the best evidence we have that it matters. But I get it. If you're just some macro bro on Instagram, you're not going to go down into all these details, because all you know is that if you count your calories, you can look shredded and all your Instagram followers will think you're great and they can just eat all the Pop Tarts they want. And it works
And then you can sell
because
them
you
your
just
protein
have to
powder with
count
your
your
affiliate
calories.
code.
Exactly. And no
Yeah.
one knows, yeah, how hungry you are, how unsustainable it is while you're doing it, all that stuff. I'll throw out, hey, I just put out a picture of myself. I didn't have a lot of body fat. I was like pretty lean
Yeah,
and
you
cut.
said there's no protein powders, no creatine, none of that BS. Just
No
no
macros. Yeah,
satale.
none of that. No scales, no calories. No, I didn't even use many weights. All I did was throw around some dumbbells. You don't need any of
Yeah,
that. I just
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of do
yeah.
it just to prove that you can do it. I didn't count calories. All I do is I focus on nutrient dense foods. And it happens. Like, this is how humans live. At one point you asked, like, how do we go back to that? Like, what, this is just how humans thrive and survive. And it's inherent to us. We know how to do it. We just are so confused by modern marketing and everything around us that we think we need the protein powders and to count calories and all this stuff. Like, no, you're just doing the
You
wrong things.
you
This
can't
is
deny
not
the influence
hard.
of modern marketing because there's billions of dollars and some of the brightest minds behind it. And dude, to second that, I mean, you looked fucking shredded. You looked great. I'm not sure how old you are, but you looked amazing. And in fact, I take the same
38.
approach, and I'm thriving. That's unbelievable, man. Good for you. You look awesome, and I'm sure you feel awesome all the time. And you seem to be
Hmm.
living a very, very happy, very fulfilled life as well. My gym is a few kettlebells and a fitness band for maybe a little bit of isolation and postural prevention and correction. And I just eat nutrient dense food all day long, man. That's all I do. I don't work out as much as I used to when I was studying in school, and I used to do the whole macros thing, and I was not thriving back then, man. I feel my best, I feel my sharpest, my cleanest, and it's a lot simpler. It's just going back to these ancestral ways. Can we
Yeah.
and just to before I get to the next point, I wanted to quickly summarize. What these foods do is these modern foods is they exploit the reward mechanisms that real food has. It's concentrated, but it has no real reward. In fact, there's a detriment. And I think going back to an earlier point that we made, you know, we're given these hyper palatable foods. They're super, they're everywhere. It's extremely convenient to in terms of access and cost.
Mhm.
And then we are underdiagnosing what happens as a result of consuming these foods consistently. We're not diagnosing that. So it's like they want to hide the evidence of what's really
Mhm.
going on when we consume these foods. Um, but anyway, going on to the next point, can you share what it feels like? I mean, we saw the picture, what you look like, and what you eat.
Mhm.
But what does it feel like when you make this transition to a more ancestral way of life? What are the feelings? What kind of feelings can we help people assign to their goals
Mm.
beyond the physical of looking great and having a six pack? How do you actually feel?
That's a good topic because it's hard to convince people to make a change. And even if I do lay out all the amazing benefits, it's still going to be hard for someone to believe that that's how they're going to feel. So it is a bit of a personal journey. And I always say that it was a journey for me. And it took many years for me to not want the processed foods and just completely turn them down even if they're free, and start going to my local ranches and like getting the best meat. So yes, it's a journey, but as you go along this journey, I'll tell you, you feel better and better. I've not heard of people who feel worse. It's always a positive when you go down this rabbit hole. And I should mention the other factors too, because it's not only food. And I'm sure everyone kind of realizes that, and your listeners are probably pretty savvy with other stuff too. But what I focus on sleep every night. I am in bed for 8.5 hours. I'm giving myself enough sleep. I am out in the sun whenever I can. I'm getting my vitamin D. I go around noon when the sun is strong. I take my shirt off and I lie by the pool and I read a book and I do 20 minutes on each side and I'm getting my vitamin D and then I'm getting out, right? I'm not putting on sunscreen. I'm not staying out forever. I'm getting an appropriate dose of sun and then going, inside. I am, yeah, doing the general stuff, right? Connecting with people, sense of purpose. You could go on forever about these other factors. But for me, the big thing, and movement, of course, we talked about, right? I'm doing my simple workout. I'm only in the gym less than an hour per week, less than 1 hour per week. I've never done more than an hour per week. From a lot of times, I didn't even go to the gym
One
because I
hour
had
total per week?
per week. Yes.
Huh?
I've never been to the gym for more than an hour a week since 2006. 2006 is when I was at UCLA. That's the last time I used a bench press, a squat. Well, okay. I've thrown around, I've done a few squats. Uh, since 2006, I have not spent more than 1 hour in the gym per week. And oh yeah, I mean, I sprint, I play beach volleyball, and then I do two 25-minute workouts. That's it.
Right. It's like
So
it's like there's so much, you're so active beyond those fitness sessions that, the actual gym time itself is negligible, almost negligible.
kind of. And that's for like quote muscle building time. I mean, yes, you can get lean and fit never going to the gym. If you sprint and play some sports, you never need to go to the gym. But yes, I found that I have put on muscle, a fair amount of muscle over the couple of years by doing brief, intense workouts, only 25 minutes twice a week. Okay, so I covered it's the movement side, it's the sleep, it's the sun, it's the food, and then there's the rest of the factors. I I can't look back at how I used to feel compared to how I feel now. I remember everyone knows the like 3 p.m. like crash. People have like 2
Mhm.
to 3 p.m. They're crashing.
Yep.
Don't get that anymore. I wake up. I mean, it's unbelievable. I don't even remember how bad I used to feel. Like, because I'll see it maybe if I'm on a vacation and I go off my plan for like a little bit, and then it starts coming back. I'm like, wow, this is how I used to feel. Right? You're tired, you like want to take a nap, you're not feeling like you're ready to like attack the world. It just everything about it is worse. And I think it's all of the factors too. I think food is the most important factor. Food is, the biggest factor, right? This is what moves the needle the most. Because you can not do any of the other things I mentioned and still get a huge result from food. I'm not saying you shouldn't do them all, but I work with Dr. Gary. I talk to some other doctors in the space. They're like, yeah, this lady's in a wheelchair. She's on food stamps. She completely reversed her type 2 diabetes and lost, 100 pounds just from changing the food, right? Just changing the food. Going, she went more animal based and it completely just changed her life. Hear these stories all the time. So it's all the things help, but the food matters most. And once you kind of get them dialed in, you'll feel like our ancestors. I think I'm getting a glimpse into how people are supposed to feel. Put it that way, right? You're just, especially, I think people may feel glimpses of this sometimes when they're maybe on a camping trip too, right? You get that experience like your fishing trip, camping, you're in nature, you're feeling good. You probably didn't eat McDonald's on this camping trip. So you probably got some decent home cooked food over the fire, your nature. You're like, wow, there's a whole new level out there. So yeah, I want
I,
people to explore that and find that.
so one thing I would add to that is modern living reinforces this poor baseline from which we never experience how we're truly supposed to feel. I think that's a good way to sort of wrap up what you just said. And I'll tell you that the way that I feel now, having made these changes, because I actually spent a, a decade of my life taking medication for attention deficit, not eating, not sleeping, not socializing, classic amphetamine use. And then because I got to a bad place, I started to become obsessed with the science of self improvement, nutrition, exercise, sleep. I mastered essentially what I had been missing out on. And now I get the chance to thrive. And for me, what that means is I feel just through and through, I feel clear. I feel ready for action. I feel light, but powerful. I feel strong. I feel like almost like crisp. It's a very very it's something that I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like it comes and goes. Maybe if you're
Mhm.
lucky, you'll feel pretty good one day. But when you can actually maintain a lifestyle in this modern world that is consistent to some degree with our ancestral ways, you'll feel your best consistently all the time. It's almost like it's too good to be true how good you feel. And it's one of those things where you have to really experience it to kind of you have to experience it for yourself. But I think that
Mhm.
it does in fact start with appreciating what we've been removed from living these modern lives and what's behind all these massive conflicts of interest that I know for some may seem like conspiracy, but it's just poor science and poor interpretation of science. And once you see that that's there, I think you will definitely have everything you need to embark on a very happy, very healthy, very fulfilling life. Is there anything, Brian, any final notes that you want to share with the audience, people tuning in, to maybe a little tidbit just to really get them on their way to practice some of these ancestral ways on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, hopefully we're convincing enough. It sounds like a sales pitch or something, but it's like
Yeah.
nothing we're saying costs any money, and we're not selling anything. So maybe that hopefully that'll help people. Uh, man, what I like to tell people when you're beginning, even if you're in the middle of it, food wise, let's double down on the animal foods, double down on the protein, and get rid of the most processed foods in your diet. That's the like simplest actionable step that people can start today, like while you're listening to this podcast, your next meal. And I think it has profound changes. And this is consistent with all the doctors I've worked with and talked to and their patients, everyone I've worked with, myself, my friends, my family. This is just the starting to the journey. And then if you're getting more of this quality animal food in your diet, that's pushing away the more processed food, or you should purposely push away the more processed food. You're instantly changing the entire nutrient density of your diet. To get technical, I'm a mechanical engineer, right? This is not technical. I'm kind of joking. Nutrient density, basically, it's just a ratio, right? It's nutrient density. What does that mean? It means basically the nutrients per calorie, or nutrients compared to excess empty calories. How do I get the most protein and nutrients with the least empty calories? That's nutrient density. Very simple. So, how do you do that? Exactly what I just said. If you double your portion, like people, I just hate this concept that has been so popularized, even in the health space. A lot of these health people that are pretty tuned in and they give a lot of good advice. And then they're like, okay, so now we're going to fill our entire plate with plants and we're going to get like this tiny, we're going to like do a microscopic eat beef once a week and you can have 4 ounces, all this stuff. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. What you need to do is double that portion of your meat, eggs, or fish, and then get rid of some of the emptiest part that you'd fill up with. If you're having bread, well, I just say ditch bread in general. But if you're having some other starch, get rid of half the starch and put an extra portion of that meat on your plate. You're doing yourself a favor. So I just say I like to start people there.
Lovely. And I know that we're pretty much out of time here. I don't know if you have a couple more minutes. I like what you
Yeah,
said
yeah.
about that huge portion of greens on the side. Can you just make a point for people about just how much, food wise, but with regards to all of
Mhm.
the plant-based vegan individuals who think they're doing their best for their personal health and for the health of the planet and are ultimately failing. What can you say on behalf of that?
Yeah. Again, we're doing this in the film, researching it. Most of these plant foods, all these greens, all these things, they weren't around a couple hundred years ago. Definitely weren't around a couple thousand years ago. Some of them, of course, grains were around, for 12,000 years. People know that. Okay. We have this entirely skewed view of health and of what humans lived off of. I went to Africa. They did not have a bunch of kale. They did not have a garden of Eden that had 500 kinds of fruits. They had a few berries, maybe, and they had a bit of honey, and they had some meat, and they had some tubers that the women dug up. Right? You need to have an accurate view of how humans lived and where we came from. This is going to be a little bit more than I need to say this stuff.
Yeah,
This is such a big
please do. I
point.
mean, I have a bunch of time. I don't know. I just wanted to be respectful towards you and your
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
But
Well, I don't want. Yeah.
please give us the
At some
spiel.
point, I
Give
do
us the
have to
full
go.
spiel.
Okay. People just have such a skewed view. You walk into the Whole Foods. We'll make fun of Whole Foods again, the grocery store. You walk in there. There's 30 kinds of fruits, 30 kinds of vegetables, and this giant cornucopia, just all there for the taking year round. This is what modern health is based on. This is like, oh, well, you have to eat your rainbow. And we all know that, this, you got to do this. You got to eat 10 tons of this, eat every color. This is so bogus. This is so bogus. This is based on nothing. I mean, they try to do studies and show, oh, there's this phytonutrient, and it's like, oh, if we get this like flavonoid, maybe it's this. Yeah, it's a lot of speculation, and maybe it's better. There's some correlations there, but this is not this is not accurate to 99% of human evolution. I keep using these 99% figures because that's what it is. People, you need to think about how humans lived for 99% of the time. And you have to think about these scales, and we're trying to do a good job in the film of showing people these scales because you don't think about it. You walk into Whole Foods, your nutritionist said you need to eat 10 kinds of colors of fruits and vegetables, and you do that. That is not right. For humans, so our ancestors, it's been, over a million years of the hominid ancestors, right, that have shaped humans. And then humans, I guess we say 300,000 years, right, when we were modern Homo sapiens. Okay, we're talking about half these fruits and vegetables weren't even around a few hundred years ago or a few thousand years ago. These were all bred to become what they are today. All the brassicas, the kale, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, all this type of stuff, they came from the wild mustard plant, right? We bred them all from this little stringy little thing that provided like 8 calories. Okay, so for all of history, for a million years, we had a stringy little mustard plant that provided 8 calories that no one cared about. And then through all the hybridization and all, throughout hundreds of years, we made it into all these different varieties of green cruciferous vegetables that we all think are super necessary for a diet. Well, what happened for a million years? Why weren't they necessary for everyone then? And then you have to think about really like, why does a certain species eat a certain way? Like, this is very important, is how the species came to be. What did they eat for the majority of their history? No one's trying to say a lion shouldn't eat meat, or a lion shouldn't eat a zebra, and a zebra shouldn't eat grass. Like, this is they are that because that's how they evolved. This is what they do. For some reason, humans think that we're the only species that should not eat the diet that they evolved on, which is very strange. It's very strange. And we think that we're trying to outsmart ourselves sometimes, right? We have this modern view, and I I don't think it's all of it is ill-conceived, or it's not all malicious, right? There's a lot of good scientists out there that aren't being funded by industry who just have this mindset that we need to eat 100 kinds of fruits and vegetables, and they're doing some research, and they're like, scraping at little results, and it's just skewing our view. But to simplify it, we did not have all these things for most of history. We ate seasonally. We had what was around us. And for much of that time, it was just a whole bunch of animal foods. I'm definitely not carnivore. I've never been carnivore. I've tried it for like a week or two. I'm not trying to make these like crazy carnivore arguments. I'm saying is that this is what humans always did. We have stable isotope nitrogen testing. We know all this, how we ate high animal food diets. There's 180 something cultures studied that were still native living, and 75% of them ate animal-based diets. There were no vegan populations, and 75% of them ate animal-based diets from all the native cultures we studied. And oh man, so we just like be realistic with what's going on. You brought up some good points. Modern society tricks you. You're stuck in this paradigm of like, this is what happens. This is the tasty food that I see in commercials. This Or even if you just enjoy it, I get it. The modern food's delicious. It's hard to snap out of this mindset. But you got to realize that this is not what humans did for most of history. And for most of history is what matters. That's what shaped, like, our guts changed, like our small intestines got longer and our large intestines got shorter because we stopped trying to digest all these plant foods, right? We're not like our chimp ancestors. Like, this is simple stuff. Vegans try to talk about the chimp ancestors. We don't have the same digestive systems as them. We can't just go munching on like leaves and berries all day. We're not going to get enough nutrients and calories.
I know
So
you recently on sapiens.org, you guys debunked that film. What was it called?
game
It's not what the
changers.
health game changers, and they made a point about the ox, right? Like the ox is this huge, beastly, strong animal. It only eats grass, and it's like the ox has a completely different digestive system,
It's
you
so
know, and
funny. It's the stupidest argument ever. It's like, yes,
yeah.
they have it's like a cow. They're ruminants. They have a 4-chamber stomach that actually makes this indigestible cellulose into fatty acids. So they actually run off of fatty acids, which is funny. It's basically how, you know, humans can run off of fat. So these arguments are ridiculous. I'm trying to wrap it up here. You got to be realistic with how humans evolved. We don't need to go back and live in caves, but you need to know that that's how people thrive. It's the simplest logical thought experiment that you don't need a single textbook to understand, is that we were thriving for all of history. We got here because we were thriving. We didn't get here because we had heart attacks and Alzheimer's and type 2 diabetes. That's not how we got here. This was not happening. Uh, what we started going wrong is when we started inventing all the modern processed foods. And yeah, you kind of just have to unthink of everything that you've learned, because it's all influenced by all the stuff we talk about, the money, the bad science, the outdated textbooks that are going to go away. It's really just this generational thing. I think once these doctors kind of retire, there's going to be a whole new, and then finally this like kind of new paradigm is going to come in. It's just, it takes, I don't know the quote. It's like new science happens like one funeral at a time. There's some quote around that. It's like when the old guard dies off, it takes a whole generation of people, or 3 generations really, to die off, and then you can get the new stuff. So, man, I went on like 10 tangents there, but just, you got to go back to like living like a human. That's it. That's what Sapien is about. It's sapien.org, no S, sapien.org. And yeah, it's just about living like Homo sapiens again. That's the whole deal.
Brian, thank you so much. I think that's a great way to wrap this up. And just final question for you: where can people find you? And when is the film going to be released?
Oh yeah, it's been 4 years in the making. We're gonna finish it by this year. I'll tell you this, Game Changers took 5 years and millions of dollars from James Cameron and his pea protein investments to come out. So we're doing it with basically no money, crowdfunding. It's been a great journey. It's changed a lot, and it's gotten a lot better over the years. And now we're in the final stages. So that'll be out. Hopefully Netflix. We have some good distribution companies after our film trying to get on Netflix. And so I'm Food Lies anywhere on social media: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Just search for Food Lies. And then sapien.org is kind of a hub. You can just check out it, links to nose to tail and anything else.
Thank you so much.